Good afternoon, and welcome to Hendricks Chapel, the spiritual heart of Syracuse University. Today we present Music and Message. This is a weekly series that features musical performances and spoken reflections from diverse religious and spiritual perspectives. We gather for Music and Message every Sunday at 4:00 p.m. throughout the academic year. And as we begin, I acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. My name is Brian Conkle. I serve as Dean of Hendricks Chapel here at Syracuse University, and thank you for being with us, those in person and also those joining us through the online broadcast. This is a special day. Today we give thanks for those participating musically in our program this afternoon, University organist Dr. Ann Laver, who we heard just a moment ago, and of course the Hendricks Chapel Choir led by Dr. Pepe Calvar. We thank Alex Snow, Brian and Logan Simons, and all who helped to make this broadcast possible and helped to create this wonderful setting here at the center of campus. Today we have a very special guest speaker. We are honored and delighted to have with us award-winning photographer and storyteller John Noltner. For over 25 years, John Noltner has created images around the world for national magazines, Fortune 500 companies, and nonprofit organizations. His images have appeared in National Geographic Traveler, the Smithsonian, Forbes, Health, Midwest Living, New York Daily News, and many more. John is the author of 2 award-winning books from his series called A Piece of My Mind. His work exhibits regularly across the country, and he leads lectures and workshops around the idea that art and storytelling has the ability to transform hearts and communities. This week, we are delighted and excited to have John Noltner with us here at Syracuse University. We'll share more about his programming later on in the program. Today, we have him for Music and Message, so I would love for us to give an orange Syracuse University welcome for our special guest speaker, Mr. John Noltner.
Good afternoon. There it is. It's good to be with you here as we move into a new week, a week that I've been looking forward to for some time now. And this afternoon, I want to talk with you about the idea of going into the wilderness. And by wilderness, I don't just mean getting off of the freeway and driving beyond the reach of your cell phone service. I mean the idea of wilderness where we can go into a space where things feel uncertain, maybe unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. In a way, we've all been thrown into the wilderness in the last couple of years, right? As we have had to navigate a perpetually shifting world. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that in a lot of ways that's been very hard. And we have a habit of shying away from hard in our lives. But over history, over thousands of years in fact, the prophets among us have ventured into hard. They've moved towards difficult because there's also clarity there. You know, when we get away from the distractions of day-to-day life, discomfort can distill and define who we are and who we become. So I want to tell you a little bit about this journey for this project called A Piece of My Mind, something I've been working on for a dozen years. And it's rooted in storytelling as a way to remember what connects us. So in the wilderness of the pandemic, when perhaps we were the most disconnected that we've been as a society, something shifted for Karen and I, my wife. Hi, Karen. We decided to up the game a little bit, and we sold our house. Our kids were raised We'd lived there 20 years, but we didn't care to rake the leaves anymore. So we sold that house and we hit the road. So this is Vinny, the mobile headquarters of A Piece of My Mind and also our home. We made a choice to slim down our material possessions and get closer to the issues of the day. And so as we travel, our backyard changes by the day, sometimes by the week. And as I go to work every day, sometimes my office looks like this. Other days it becomes a little prickly and looks like this. And our commutes seem to go from bad to horrible. But along the way, this has become a journey of discovery, and it's a journey with a mission. We're not trying just to get closer to the issues, but we're trying to get closer to the people who these issues impact. And so we would go down to the border to spend time talking about immigration. This happens to be the place where construction ended on the day construction ended on the wall. So to the left is Mexico, to the right is the United States. As we do this, we try to hear from different voices that are impacted. So along the border, we would talk to activists, but also asylum seekers and Border Patrol agents and ranchers along the way. In the process, we met a man named Pancho, who's a street nurse in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, on the south side of the border. And Pancho is trained as an EMT. He has resources through donations available to him, and he will circulate amongst the asylum seekers south of the border to find people who are in medical crisis, who have no resources to be able to get the treatment that they need, whether it's a diabetic incident or respiratory or pulmonary or cardiac incident. Pancho can help get them the help that they need. And he said in our conversation that he recognizes that he's probably not going to be able to change the circumstances of these people's lives. He's not going to be able to change the policy that impacts them, but what he can do is he can change their moment. And I wondered to myself, as we go through our days, how it could shift our lives if we made an effort to change people's moments. As we go through this process, we try to acknowledge where there's pain and struggle in the world. We try to reveal new layers of truth. We continually believe that something better is possible. And when you go into the wilderness, you can get close enough and quiet enough to hear new stories. We wanted to talk about water resources in northern Minnesota and northern Wisconsin. So we centered around the Great Lakes Basin and the Mississippi River watershed, and we wondered who needs to be heard. And so we centered on the women-led, indigenous-led water protectors movement. They were protesting a Line 3 oil pipeline that was going underneath the Mississippi River. And I was able to meet Tanya, who talked about the activism that she does and some of the challenges that she faced. And of course, she was doing what she could to protect the resources in her community for herself and for her kids, but also for her kids' kids and for their kids after them. And she talked about looking ahead 7 generations to understand the actions that we take will ripple out into the future. Was able to meet Rendell there, who talked about recovering from his opioid addiction and his other substance abuse, which is an issue that's challenging his community. And he said that he was making a choice to recover out loud so that others around him didn't have to struggle and die in silence. And I met Luna, who was talking about murdered and missing Indigenous women. And she talked about the activism that she did and the choice that she made to raise her voice for others who have been silenced along the way. When you go into the wilderness, you start to recognize your blind spots. With my very first exhibit for A Piece of My Mind, and I tell you this as we go into Indigenous Peoples Day, in my very first exhibit, there were no stories of Native American people, and at the end of one of my lectures, a woman stood up, an Ojibwe woman, and she said, "How come I don't see any stories of Native American people? Does my voice not matter?" And as an artist, I had to recognize that I'd failed in that regard, and that the project, and in fact all of us, would be better the more voices we could include. So when you're in the wilderness, you start to see and recognize those blind spots. And in South Carolina, we went to talk about the historical ramifications of slavery, and we met a man named Joseph McGill, who runs a project called the Slave Dwelling Project. And Joe will go into historic slave quarters across the country, and he'll spend the night there in order to feel the immediacy of that history, and in order to talk about the importance of preserving these structures so we can have a full reckoning of our history in this country. And this is the first cabin that Joe stayed at Magnolia Plantation outside of Charleston. And Joe said that first night when he stayed there, you know, he had a couple of friends who came with him, and he had a little bit of media there. But in the evening, as people sort of drifted away and things quieted down for him, he spent time in the cabin, and he found these little depressions in the bricks in the fireplace. And he wondered what they were, and eventually he went and put his fingers into them, and his fingers were too big. And that's when he realized that they were the fingerprints of the enslaved children who'd made the bricks. Because it was the task of the adults to assemble the cabin, but it was the task of the enslaved children to make the bricks. And if they pulled them out of the molds too early, while they were still a little wet and still a little soft, their fingers would sink in. And now, 150 or 200 years later, we still have what Joe calls these echoes of humanity, to remind us of our history and to reckon with how these things still ripple out into our world today. You know, when you start to spend time in the wilderness, you start to see and understand new connections. So besides these long-form stories, we also do some short-form stories. We set up these studios to gather short stories from a community, and we're going to do that this week at Syracuse. And I want to share a little bit about that with you. We did this in Minneapolis, where we used to live, right after George Floyd was killed. So we brought our studio to that intersection of 38th and Chicago. We'll set up a studio. We ask people to respond to a question in 25 words or less. And there, we simply asked, what do you want to say? And I'll share a few results. People of color are sick and tired of being sick and tired. We're not asking for justice anymore. We're demanding it. And we're not asking for equality anymore. We're demanding it. This woman said, I'm numb. I don't feel angry. I don't feel sad, just numb. It's at the point where police brutality against African Americans is expected. I don't care who you are or what you look like. You don't have the right to hurt anybody. And this woman said simply, am I next? Because we couldn't share these stories publicly the way we normally do, we found a church just down the road with this beautiful blank white wall on its north-facing side, and we projected these images 20 feet by 30 feet every day for 2 weeks in order to say to the community, I see you, I hear you, and you matter. It's one of the most powerful things we can do for one another, and it costs us nothing to do it. We worked with veterans around PTSD and suicide prevention, and we simply asked, what have you learned? This woman said, trauma doesn't define you. You may feel lost and alone, but you're not broken. If you're alive, hope lives and healing can follow. Joe said, if suicide seems like the only answer, then you're asking the wrong question. I've learned to enjoy life again. And Bonnie said Brian's suicide didn't stop his pain. It just gave a piece of it to everyone who knew and loved him. We found in this process that if you simply create a space for listening, if people feel heard, they'll share powerful and profound things. And one last set of examples, we went to a retreat center, Holden Village, out in the Washington Cascades. And we asked people, when have you found unexpected courage? And this woman said, I took my older sister by the hands and told her it was going to be okay, as she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. And Deb said, many days the mere act of getting up and doing life is courageous. I do life solo. I have no family. I don't do life alone, but I do life solo. You know, and after we gather these stories, we typically reflect them back to the community. And so I made a video and I shared these stories back to the 300 people who were there. And the next morning in the dining hall, Deb sought me out and she said, I want to talk to you. And I thought, oh no. You know, now she's disappointed that she made herself vulnerable. She's feeling bad about exposing these really personal thoughts. But she came up and she said, you know, after you projected those images, she said a dozen people came up to me afterwards and said, that's me too. That's my experience as well. Or I've been married for 50 years and now my spouse has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Help me understand how to do this. And I think so often in our lives, we put up these walls of protection so that we don't make ourselves vulnerable, so that we don't embarrass ourselves. But in the process, we also insulate ourselves from the very best of what human relationships and what community can offer us. So our wilderness these days includes going to places that need healing. You know, this is the site where Emmett Till's body was found along the Tallahatchie River during the Civil Rights Campaign. We go places where we can acknowledge and recognize that we have made progress in our history. And we also acknowledge that there's plenty of work left to do. We happen to find ourselves at the Supreme Court when the Dobbs case dropped this summer. You know, we are defining our wilderness as the growing edge of voices that need to be heard and work that needs to be done. And we've found purpose and mission in that space. Now, as we prepare for the new week, I want to invite you to join us as well. We've got an exhibit that is at the Shine Student Center in the Panache Lounge. Did I say it right? I think I said it right. It's going to be there through Wednesday night. I would encourage you to spend some time with this exhibit to read a few of these stories. It turns out there's beauty and wisdom all around us if we take the time to see it. You know, we have, so that's going to be up through Wednesday evening at the Panache Lounge. We're doing a studio series here. We're asking, what does community mean to you? And you can interpret that however you want. It's a really short process. You just come down to our studio, and the studio is going to be set up in the People's Place Cafe down there tomorrow morning and Tuesday morning from 8 until 11:30. You just write your response, 25 words or less, on a sheet of paper. If you need to talk it through, if you need help reducing it down to 25 words, we can help you with that. And then we'll do the freest and most amazing black and white portrait of you you've ever seen. We combine the word and images, and then we're going to share that back Wednesday night in the Noble Room downstairs from 4 to 5. We're going to have a keynote presentation to talk a little bit more about this notion of storytelling to bridge divides and build community, and we're going to share back the Syracuse community stories about what community means to you. So I hope that you'll stop. A piece of my mind is public art. And it only works when the public shows up. You know, the work of connections and community is work that belongs to all of us. So I'm looking forward to what we can create together. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. Our soloists today are David Gaz and Enzo Cupani.
Oh, the king cried, oh, Daniel, Daniel, oh, Daniel, Daniel, oh, the Hebrew Daniel, servant of the Lord. The king cried, oh, Daniel, Daniel, oh, Daniel, Daniel, oh, the Hebrew Daniel, servant of the Lord.
Among the Hebrew nation, one Hebrew Daniel was found. They put him in the lion's den. He stayed there all night long.
The king cried, oh, Daniel, Daniel, oh, Daniel, Daniel,
Oh, that a Hebrew Daniel,
servant of the Lord.
Now the king in his sleep was troubled, and early in the morning he rose to find God had sent his angel down to lock the lion's jaws. Oh, the king cried, oh, Daniel, Daniel, oh,
Daniel, Daniel,
Daniel, oh.
the Hebrew Daniel, servant of the Lord.
Just another final announcement. Again, after our program here today, we do invite everyone to the Shine Student Center, to the Panache Lounge, to interact with John Noltner's exhibit this evening, and also the studio that's at People's Place Cafe tomorrow and Tuesday morning, and the final presentation in the Noble Room on Wednesday afternoon. Our final blessing today is in honor of this past week's Catholic celebration of the Feast of St. Francis, as we offer some of his most famous words, which begin what many have come to know as the Serenity Prayer. May we all receive the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you all for being here. Please be well.